She did not flinch. That was the part Lynette could not stop thinking about afterward. Not the sound, not the silence that followed, not even the faces of the people who saw it happen and chose to look away. It was the stillness of the woman in the gray wool coat. The way she straightened her glasses with one hand, picked up the paper coffee cup she had set on the counter, and walked to the far end of the waiting area, as though nothing worth her attention had occurred. Lynette had been standing close enough to feel the air move. She was the one who gasped. The morning had started the way most mornings at the Harrowfield Grand did, with a particular kind of quiet that the hotel prided itself on. The lobby was the sort of space that made people lower their voices without being asked. Dark walnut paneling, brass fixtures worn to a soft gold, the low hum of a grand piano that no one was currently playing. The Harrowfield sat on the corner of King and Bay in Toronto, and it had been there for over a century. Guests did not check in at the Harrowfield, they arrived. The front desk was staffed by 3 people on weekday mornings. Lynette, who had worked hospitality for 11 years and quietly hated the phrase the Harrowfield experience. A newer hire named Piers, who wore his uniform jacket a size too small and compensated by standing very straight, and Sandra, the senior concierge, who had been at the hotel for 22 years and wore that fact like a second blazer. The woman came in just after 8. She came through the revolving door from the street, not from the parkade entrance that most guests used when arriving from Pearson. She was wearing gray wool, a long coat, simply cut, the kind that could cost $400 or $4,000 and looked exactly the same either way. Dark jeans, flat ankle boots, a leather carry-on bag over one shoulder, the kind worn soft at the corners from years of use, no luggage cart, no assistant trailing behind her. She was carrying a paper coffee cup from the Tim Hortons 2 blocks over, and she was looking at her phone as she walked. She was not looking at it the way people do when they're killing time. She was reading, moving through the lobby with the ease of someone who had been in many lobbies and was not particularly impressed by any of them, including this one. Piers watched her cross the floor. Lynette noticed him watching. The woman reached the desk and set her coffee cup down on the marble surface. She looked up from her phone. "Good morning," she said. "Abena Asante-Darko. I have a reservation." Her voice was even. A slight trace of something, not quite an accent, more like the memory of one. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, Lynette guessed. Dark skin, close-cropped natural hair, reading glasses pushed up on her head. No jewelry, except small gold studs and a watch that Lynette could not identify, but that sat on the wrist with a certain authority. Piers typed something, looked at the screen, typed again. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm not finding anything under that name. It may be under Asante Holdings." A brief pause. "Or possibly, my assistant booked it under the company account, Meridian Group." Piers typed. His expression did not change, but something shifted behind it, the faint recalibration of someone deciding something. "I'm still not seeing it," he said. "Do you have a confirmation number?" "I don't have it on me right now." She glanced at her phone. "Give me a moment. I can pull the email." This was when Sandra appeared. Sandra had a way of materializing at the desk during moments she had privately categorized as situations. She was not unkind, exactly. She was precise. She had opinions about the lobby that she enforced the way some people enforce grammar. Not with cruelty, but with absolute certainty that the standards existed for a reason, and the reason was obvious. "Is there something I can help with?" Sandra asked, positioning herself slightly in front of Piers. "She's looking for a reservation," Piers said. "Under Asante-Darko." Sandra looked at the woman. The woman was still scrolling through her phone. She had not looked up. "Ma'am," Sandra said, "do you have identification?" "I'm looking for the confirmation email," the woman said, still reading. "It was sent last Thursday." "The thing is," Sandra said, and Lynette recognized the tone, had heard it directed at delivery drivers and journalists, and once at a woman who had been a sitting MP. "We have a policy here about unconfirmed reservations. If you don't have a booking number, I'm going to need you to step aside while we contact our reservations team. It could take some time." The woman looked up then. She looked at Sandra with a gaze that was entirely calm and entirely clear. Not angry, not wounded. The kind of look that comes from a person who has been looked at in a particular way so many times that they have long since stopped being surprised by it, and have also long since stopped needing to respond to it. "I'm not going to step aside," she said. "I have a reservation. I'm going to find the confirmation number." Sandra's chin lifted a fraction. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to step aside so that we can serve other guests." There were no other guests at the desk. "There are no other guests at the desk," the woman said. The lobby was not silent. The piano recording was still playing, and there was the distant sound of the restaurant beginning service. But the front desk had gone very quiet. Lynette thought afterward that she had seen it coming and had not moved fast enough to stop it. That was the part she would carry. She had seen Sandra's hand move, had thought for one confused second that Sandra was going to gesture toward the seating area, point to a chair, make some procedural motion. She had not expected what actually happened. The sound was sharp and flat and wrong in a way that seemed to change the acoustics of the room. Sandra had struck her, an open palm, across the left cheek. Not hard enough to knock her down. Hard enough that her glasses slipped. Hard enough that the paper cup tipped and rolled off the counter edge. Hard enough that the two guests who had just come off the elevator and were crossing the lobby stopped walking. The woman straightened her glasses. She did not cry out. She did not grab her face. She picked up the paper coffee cup from where it had fallen against the side of the desk, looked at it briefly, and set it back down. Then she walked to the far row of chairs near the window, sat down, and returned to her phone, as though she were waiting for a cab. As though nothing Sandra had done was worth the cost of her composure. Lynette went on break 20 minutes later and sat in the staff room and stared at the wall for a long time. She had not said anything at the desk. She had wanted to. She had opened her mouth and felt the air go out of her and said nothing. And then Sandra had turned back to the terminal as though the morning had resumed its normal shape, and Piers had found something very important to organize near the key drawer. The woman had sat by the window for exactly 9 minutes. Lynette knew because she had watched the clock. At minute 9, a man in a dark suit came through the front entrance, walked directly to her, and bent to speak quietly near her ear. She nodded once. She stood, took her bag, and left. She did not look at the front desk on her way out. She did not look back. Her name was Abena Asante-Darko. Lynette found this out 3 days later, though the people at the top of the Harrowfield found it out considerably sooner. Abena Asante-Darko had been born in Scarborough, Ontario, the second daughter of a woman who cleaned offices at night and a man who drove a bus for the TTC for 31 years. She had studied computer science at Ryerson on a scholarship she had applied to 14 times before she got it. She had started her first company in a basement apartment on Gerrard Street with a second-hand laptop and a credit card that was almost maxed out, writing inventory management software for small businesses that the big firms wouldn't touch. That company had been acquired for $63 million when she was 31. The company she founded with the proceeds of that acquisition had been acquired for considerably more. So had the third. The fourth she had not sold. It was called Meridian Group, and it was currently the largest black-owned technology company in Canada, and the 38th largest tech firm in the country by revenue. She was also, as a matter that had come up quietly during a board meeting 4 months ago, in discussions to acquire a 23% stake in Harrowfield Properties International, the holding company that owned the Harrowfield Grand and 11 other luxury hotels across the country. The man in the dark suit who had come to collect her was her chief financial officer. She had been in Toronto for a preliminary meeting with the Harrowfield Properties Board. She had booked the hotel herself, through her assistant, 3 weeks in advance. The reservation had been entered under the wrong company name due to an administrative error. She had known this was going to be the case, had sent an email that morning, before she left her house in Rosedale, to flag it, and had been entirely prepared to sort it out at the desk. She had not anticipated Sandra. The call that came into Harrowfield Properties' international headquarters came not from a lawyer, not from a publicist, not from a threatening letter on corporate letterhead. It came from Abena's CFO, the man in the dark suit, whose name was Vincent, and it was brief. Miss Asante-Darko, he said, was withdrawing from acquisition discussions. The board had 24 hours to respond with a formal statement of accountability before she released a brief public account of what had occurred in the lobby of the flagship property. The director of corporate affairs, a man named Gordon, took the call. He listened. He thanked Vincent for his time. He hung up and sat for a moment in his ergonomic chair and then called the general manager of the Harrowfield Grand, whose name was Paul. Paul, it turned out, had already heard from Lynette. Lynette had not gone to Paul immediately. She had thought about it for 2 days and had called her sister and had gone for a long walk along the waterfront and had thought about what it would mean and what it would not mean, and had concluded, at around 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, that the weight of not saying anything was heavier than the weight of saying it. She had typed up a formal account and emailed it to Paul at midnight. Paul had read it at 6 the next morning and had not eaten breakfast. Sandra was suspended pending an investigation by 10 o'clock that Thursday. Piers was interviewed. The lobby security footage was reviewed. It was brief and conclusive and showed exactly what Lynette had described. By noon, the story had reached the communications team at Harrowfield Properties. By 3 o'clock, someone had sent the security footage to a journalist. By 7 o'clock that evening, the footage was on 3 major Canadian news sites, and a clip of it, 15 seconds, the sound of the slap, and then the long, terrible steadiness of the woman adjusting her glasses, had been viewed 400,000 times. It was not Abena who had sent it. She was in a dinner meeting when her publicist texted her to say that the clip was circulating. She read the text, set her phone face down, and continued the meeting. When it ended, she sat in the back of her car on the way home and watched the clip once with the sound off. The way you might look at something you already knew was there. She called her publicist back at 10:30 and said 3 things. She would not be doing interviews. She would release one written statement, and the statement would say only what was true and nothing more than what was true. The statement went out the following morning. It did not use the word racism, though every person who read it understood that this was what it described. It used words like judgment, assumption, professional conduct, and the cost of how we choose to see people. It was 8 sentences long. It ended with a line that became, over the following days, the sentence people quoted most often: "I did not leave because I was angry. I left because the meeting I came for was no longer one I was willing to have." The financial consequences arrived in a sequence that felt, to those watching from the outside, both inevitable and breathtaking in its speed. 2 institutional investors, who held positions in Harrowfield Properties, issued statements expressing concern. A pension fund that had been in preliminary discussions about a new partnership paused those discussions pending review. The hotel's direct booking numbers dropped 17% in 4 days, a figure that seemed small until you applied it to the revenue projections for the coming fiscal quarter. Then the other thing happened. 3 Canadian tech executives, 2 of them friends of Abena's, one of them someone she had never met, released a joint statement saying that they would be reviewing whether to hold events or accommodate their corporate guests at Harrowfield Properties. One of them was the CEO of a company that booked 40 rooms a month at the Toronto flagship alone. Gordon, the director of corporate affairs, gave 3 media interviews in 48 hours. He used the word unacceptable 14 times. He announced that Sandra had been terminated, that a full review of staff training was underway, that the hotel was committed to equity and inclusion and the dignity of every guest. He did not announce that the acquisition deal with Meridian Group was dead, but the business press had already calculated what that deal's collapse meant for the company's growth projections through the following year. The number was significant. Lynette resigned 4 days after the incident. She did not resign in protest, exactly, though that was how some people framed it, when the story continued to develop. She had been thinking about leaving for a while. The lobby camera footage had pushed her to the edge of a decision she had been standing near for some time. She took a job with a hospitality consulting firm that focused on equity and workplace accountability. She gave one interview, brief, in which she said that she had tried to say something and hadn't, and that she thought about that every day. She did not say anything more than that. She was not looking for attention. She had just run out of reasons to stay silent. Abena Asante-Darko gave a keynote address at the Canadian Technology Leadership Summit in Ottawa 7 weeks after the incident. She had been booked to speak before any of it happened. The organizers had offered, twice, to adjust the focus of her talk if she preferred to address the events publicly. She had declined both offers. She walked onto the stage in a room of 600 people and spoke for 35 minutes about the economics of trust, specifically, about what happens to companies and institutions when they build cultures that teach people to assess value based on appearance and what it costs them when those assessments are wrong. She did not mention the Harrowfield by name. She did not mention Sandra. She did not describe what had happened in the lobby. Near the end of the address, she said this: "I have been in rooms where I was not expected. I have been in rooms where no one thought I could afford to be there. I have learned that the most expensive mistake a person can make in business or in life is deciding what someone is worth before you've taken the time to find out. Not because they might turn out to be powerful, not because they might have money, but because you are building the kind of person you are every time you make that judgment, and that person will eventually cost you more than you budgeted for." The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something has been said that people want to hold for a moment before they let it go. Then it was not quiet anymore. She stepped back from the microphone, picked up the glass of water from the podium, and took a long sip. Someone in the third row had started crying. She did not appear to notice. Her flight back to Toronto was at 6:15. Her assistant had booked her into a hotel near the airport. A different hotel, a different chain, a different lobby. She arrived for check-in without a confirmation number and spent a brief moment searching her email. The woman at the front desk waited. She did not sigh. She did not shift. She did not suggest that Abena step aside. She simply waited, pleasantly, while Abena found the booking, and then checked her in with the easy efficiency of someone who had been trained to understand that every person standing at that desk was worth exactly the same amount of her time and her courtesy. It cost nothing. It had always cost nothing. Abena took her key, thanked her, and walked to the elevator. The doors closed. The lobby went on being a lobby, quiet, lit, open, and outside on the highway the evening traffic moved north toward the city, and the day, unhurried and ordinary, came to its end.